We're looking back at our top 5 stories for 2014 and now to the tragedy of the Nigerian building collapse in September that left 116 people dead. Among those who died were more than 80 South Africans. They traveled to Lagos to meet TV evangelist TB Joshua. The church guest house they were staying in collapsed. For 4 days, the disaster went unreported, leading to speculation of an attempted cover-up by the Synagogue Church of All Nations.
And not a single news headline was seen. Four days later, President Jacob Zuma makes this unexpected announcement in Parliament.
It is a very sad day today to us as a country for losing so many of our people. 67 so far that have been identified who were part of the church service at Synagogue Church in Nigeria.
Survivors begin to arrive at OR Tambo International Airport, reliving the horror of their experiences.
I was there for 13 hours. We were very thirsty there. We were getting water from the drops of this wall that was on top of us. It was so difficult to breathe. But as I said to you before, as we're calling on God, bring oxygen.
For about that 12 hours, I was like this, and there was a lady next to me. I was sleeping on her abdomen. I can't move. She was crying all this time.
For several days, families gathered at the airport playing the waiting game for news of their loved ones.
I'm hopeful she will come. I still believe that she's alive. What is hurting is that people from Nigeria, from this church, they refuse to speak to us. I show them pictures, asking them if they have seen my sister. They just refuse to speak. I'm not digging for secrets they do in that church, but all I want is to know if they have seen my sister.
She said, "Thank you, my son, and may God bless you, and I love you." And that was the last time I spoke to her.
For some, their prayers were answered, while others were left accepting the worst. Meanwhile, rescue operations were proving to be difficult, and questions were raised as to whether everything possible was being done to rescue those buried beneath the rubble. Allegations began to fly that the church had denied emergency services access to the site for a crucial 72 hours. President Jacob Zuma set up an interministerial team headed by Jeff Radebe to assist South African victims and their families. And a team of more than 80 repatriation experts was sent to Nigeria to help with the identification process.
Would like to announce the evacuation of 26 injured South African citizens from Lagos back home to South Africa.
"25 injured survivors arrive at Swartkoop Air Force Base, among them 2 children orphaned by the tragedy.
Can't wait to see her. We've been waiting long for her to come back.
3 of the patients who landed this morning had their limbs amputated, others from upper knee and others below the knee. And one of them, who has been rushed to the hospital, the Steve Biko Hospital, developed gangrene during this tragedy, and their toes will be amputated.
2 weeks since the disaster, and the death toll in Nigeria now stood at 115, with 84 of the victims identified as South Africans.
The most difficult part now, the phase that we're entering in with our assessment team in Lagos, is now to start the effort of repatriating the 84 South Africans who have been identified to be deceased in this tragedy.
We've been waiting, it's been a long time. 2 months is not child's play.
The remains of 74 people are received at Waterkloof Air Force Base. At an emotional memorial service, families broke down as a list of their loved ones was read out loud. But while the families of 74 victims were able to lay their loved ones to rest, 11 bodies remain in Nigeria and the agonizing wait continues for their relatives. But what caused the tragedy? The church's leader, T.B. Joshua, linked it to a suspicious plane seen flying overhead minutes before the incident. Many of his followers believe the collapse was the work of the devil. Others say the building fell victim to Lagos's history of poor construction. Zikhona Chona, Johannesburg.
Tragically, we are still waiting for the return of 11 bodies to South Africa. Our thoughts are with all South Africans grieving the loss of their loved ones at this time. And we think as well of the family of Pierre Korki, who was killed during an attempt to free one of his fellow captives in November this year. He'd been held hostage in Yemen since May 2012. After the break, we come home to dark days thanks to Eskom. We are looking back at our top stories of 2014. We've covered the elections, political shifts, parliamentary meltdowns, high-profile court cases, Nkandla, and the tragic loss of South African lives in Nigeria. Now to our final story of the year. 2014 has been a tough year for Eskom. The power utility has been lurching from one crisis to another. And with no apparent end in sight to the rolling blackouts, let's take a look back at what may have led to the parastatal's problems.
In 2008, Eskom announced that it was in trouble. The national power grid was under severe strain, and the only way to avoid a complete shutdown was to introduce systemic power cuts. Since then, load shedding has become a common phrase in South Africa. In February, Eskom once again declared a power emergency and warned that rolling blackouts were imminent. That was the first of 4 announcements of load shedding in 2014. To try and help people deal with the power outages, Eskom and local municipalities released load shedding schedules. But even when the schedules were followed, businesses were hardest hit.
Since the load shedding has begun and we've had 3 days of it, I would estimate that we've lost about 120,000 rands in turnover, and that for us is a lot of money.
When load shedding does take place, it's just people just get so disheartened, they pack up.
The South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry said its members were worried.
When one looks at retail, one looks at the services industry, when one looks at tourism, there is a dramatic impact on those industries. In the tourism industry, it's probably to a greater extent fears about what's to come as opposed to actual business impact. On the retail and services side, they're feeling the impact every day.
But what brought us to this point? Eskom has given many reasons for its inability to meet power demand. The collapse of a coal storage silo at Majuba, the lack of diesel at its gas turbine power stations, water shortages at its hydroelectric operations, and human error have all been blamed.
Some of the incidents that have taken out capacity have had to do with the human element, human failure. Whilst the machines themselves have challenges due to age and so on, human factor sometimes causes these trips that push us over the edge.
But these challenges are ultimately the result of years of bad planning and missed deadlines. In 1998, Eskom warned Parliament that the country would run out of power by 2007 if new power stations were not built. Government delayed the plan, and when it finally gave the green light to build, the new projects were dogged by delays and industrial action. New power plants which are still under construction are years behind schedule. Add to that the challenge of trying to give more people access to electricity.
Pre-1994, we had this generation capacity in our country that was catering for a minority of people in our country. Now we have to cater for the whole population of our country.
With so much pressure on the grid, there's a danger that the poor and powerless will be forgotten.
According to the recent report which was issued by the National Energy Regulator, NERSA, KwaZulu-Natal and parts of Limpopo are mostly the ones which still need to be electrified. So that is where the focus is. At this stage, I'm sure it's going to be relatively difficult for us to continue the electrification program. But as I say, the government is going to give us the allocations, the monies, and also to identify the areas which need to be electrified. However, it's important to know that we can only electrify when we have electricity to connect in the first place.
Many believe the answer lies in renewable power sources such as solar, gas and wind power. One energy consultant says solar panels can save up to 40% of energy consumption in every house, taking some demand from the national grid. It's certainly boom time for businesses trading in alternative energy sources. Some consumers turning to gas and solar for heating and cooking.
You're getting panels that are above 40% efficient now, but they're very expensive. So it's a balance between what's affordable and what works. So generally our panels, your average panel runs at 20% efficiency.
Although these products are efficient and cost-effective, they can't solve Eskom's immediate energy supply challenges. And while the power cuts continue to frustrate South Africans, Eskom's top brass insist there's no crisis.
Eskom is not a company in crisis. We may have a crisis with regard to availability of electricity in the country. There is a shortage. It's a big problem. It's clearly a big problem that we don't have enough electricity in the economy. Now, you may want to describe it as a crisis, so I think you need to distinguish between the two.
Government has now intervened. It's appointed the National Treasury to take control of Eskom, as well as South African Airways and the South African Post Office. There's now a 5-step plan in place to prevent more blackouts in coming months. A technical team will manage interventions that Eskom will undertake in the next 30 days. It will seek to extend existing contracts with the private sector. The plan involves accelerating the program to substitute diesel with gas at the diesel power plants. The 4th step is to launch an independent coal power producing program. And finally, to manage demand through retrofitting energy efficient technologies at private homes, public and private buildings, as well as municipalities. Cabinet also echoed Eskom's statement that there is no crisis, only challenges that are being dealt with. What Eskom needs now is something in short supply: time and money. It needs to urgently complete the Kusile and Medupi power stations and maintain its infrastructure. 2015 is likely to see some new power generating units come online, but it will take some time before energy supply meets demand. The picture remains bleak for consumers who now have to foot the bill for decades of underpriced electricity and poor planning. Tabang Masanabo, Johannesburg.
And those were your top 5 stories of 2014. eNCA will continue to bring you the big stories as they happen. Here's to a good 2015. Take care and goodbye.